We're making progress technically. Hey, hey,
And
Laura.
we're live. Oh my God, look at that hair
Oh.
and the
Hey,
magical
friends.
flash. Oh my God,
Hello,
hold on.
Maggie Feldman-Piltch.
Hey, shh. We're live. It is Tuesday, September 21st, 2021, 5:02 p.m. And Maggie Feldman-Piltch is here to tell us lies.
Or the
And
truth.
her fantabulous hair. But first, a monologue in two parts, none of it being in French because that would be cruel.
What do you mean?
Wait.
You can do the monologue in French.
No, none of it being in French. Alex and Ev, live from Canada on the presidential election.
There's no, not presidential.
On the election.
We have two provinces represented here. And three if you count British Columbia, because Ev was in British Columbia until she wasn't. You guys had a national election. Most people in the United States did not notice. I watched the election returns live, texting with you both as I did so. And as best as I can tell, absolutely nothing changed. Alex, the view from Ontario.
Well, it's my view. It's not necessarily the view. Yeah, I mean, I've heard the joke about this being the Seinfeld election, right? You know, the election about nothing. And certainly, if you look at the numbers, that seems a fair assessment. Every party ended up within like one or two seats of where it began. So, you know, maybe we're just, you know, a little too comfortable up here. Like everything seemed fine. Yeah, I think most of us have kind of woken up afterwards and saying, what the hell was that for? What was the point of that?
Ev, the view from Quebec.
I certainly don't represent the view from Quebec.
You represent a view from Quebec.
I like how you keep trying to like ascribe them like this.
Yeah, you represent like, all of Quebec for purposes of this conversation.
Yeah, and they're like typically Canadian, and they're like very polite refusal to speak for more than themselves.
You were saying, Ben, that nobody in the States have realized that we were having an election. I would say
Except
that
me.
It's the same in Canada. Actually, it was really, it was, people weren't following the election. As Alex was saying, nobody really wanted this election. And it turned out bad for Trudeau, who thought that he could have a majority. But because like having an election wasn't the thing that we wanted to have in the middle of a pandemic, he ended up losing. He won the election, but I don't think that this morning he woke up being very satisfied with the results. And even some people, like yesterday, many people were asking like, oh, is he going to resign? So yeah, that's it.
What do you think, Alex? Is Trudeau satisfied this morning, or is he singing, is that all there is?
So again, I mean, at the risk of just parroting conventional wisdom here, but it's conventional wisdom I happen to agree with, I think it depends on what you choose as your benchmark, right? Compared to what his objectives were and what they thought they could do, you know, a couple of months ago. The election was called sort of beginning of August. And in July, it looked like the Liberals actually could win a majority, given where the polls were. So from that perspective, yeah, this is really disappointing. However, the day that the election was called was the day that Kabul fell. And, you know, there were sort of a whole lot of other events that made Trudeau look a little bit flat-footed, and in the middle of the election campaign, it actually looked like there might be a conservative government rather than a liberal government. So from that perspective, it looks like he snatched victory from the jaws of defeat.
And one other question before I vanish you both into the Greek chorus. We had there is a Canadian Trumpist party that has emerged out of the primordial ooze. It is, as best as I can tell, anti-vax, pro-gun rights, and basically Alberta separatist. All of it except the last part being true. What do we make of the People's Party of Canada and its performance yesterday?
Actually, in Quebec, we make fun of it.
It's led by a Quebecer, though, right?
It is, and a former minister.
So I blame you.
Whose nickname I might add was Mad Max. Although I did see someone clever on Twitter earlier today making fun of his of how well he did in his electoral district, calling him Maxime Dernier, which is the pun works if you understand French, but anyway.
I understand it.
Okay. I don't.
Oh, sorry. Bernier is his last name. Dernier means last.
I see.
So. I mean, it's hard to make an exact one-to-one comparison, right? To say that he's Trumpist is somewhat descriptive, but it's also deceptive because, Trump is a very singular phenomenon and a very American one. Maxime Bernier, I mean, he's certainly tapping into a libertarian streak, and despite that he's from Quebec. Well, the region I don't know. You live closer to that region than I do, obviously, Ev. But my understanding is that region actually does have something of a libertarian streak, and he's certainly tapped into a libertarian streak out west in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And a lot of people who thought that the Conservatives had kind of gone squishy soft. Kind of migrated to the People's Party. So you ended up with the Liberals maybe winning some seats that they wouldn't have otherwise, or out west, the NDP winning some seats that they wouldn't have won otherwise. The NDP being our left-wing party.
Ev?
Well, I don't feel like this party made a huge difference. Even in his own running, he ended up really last. And even if it's a place where you're right. Those are pretty much anti-vax and huge protests about vaccination and liberties, and he ended up losing big time anyway. And he has no seats, so I don't think that it had made a significant difference. It's something to be cautious about, sure. We don't want to end up having similar problems that you might have. But I don't think that we should take him too seriously.
All right. So at the end of the day, Canada holds elections. Almost nothing changes. Alex, Eve, thank you for this impromptu appearance. And by the way, that 10 minutes of discussion of the Canadian election is like more than the entire American press has done. Which brings us to Maggie Feldman-Piltch.
They're our greatest trading partner.
They are.
Well, it's important to be good at something.
And they're, it's just, it's the country we're all going to flee to when things get too bad here. Maggie, I have already found the lie.
Which is?
The picture of you that we used for this, that Kate used, doesn't have purple hair.
And that picture gets found and pulled for really specific things. This is the first time that someone who actually knows me has used it. Mostly,
it was just the first picture. I was just lazy. It was just
because
the first
people
one.
who put it up, they have actual web expertise and know how to make things.
And they airbrush.
They SEO'd it. Yeah.
They SEO'd it, and I think it's talk about false advertising, right?
Yeah. It made you look,
normal.
It made you look like not Maggie.
Right.
All right. So Maggie, do you know the rules of this game?
I don't.
Okay. So here are the rules.
Okay.
You tell a story, It can be any length, but we have to take up the whole hour or 49
Don't
more
do what
minutes
Virginia
discussing
did to us yesterday.
Virginia did a 1-sentence story.
I
We've
wanted to
usually
murder
done
her.
more like a 20-minute story, but it's, it's
Okay.
up to you.
And like
Okay.
Dwayne Best did like
audience
35 minutes.
Has to figure out if the story is true. And we have to figure out. So right now, people are already voting. A majority believes you're going to lie. The
Which
audience,
is wild.
the audience can change its vote at any time. You will tell your story. We will ask you each 3 questions. We will bring on members of the audience who can each ask you 3 questions. We will then render a verdict. The audience will vote. Kate will announce her judgment. I will announce my judgment. The audience members will say whether they think you are lying. And then you will do the big reveal about whether the story is true.
Okay.
That's the game.
Are there any other rules or practices that I should be aware of in this context?
Well, there is a rule, but it applies to the audience, not to you.
Okay.
And the rule is that the audience is not allowed to Google anything that you say to check. They have to use only their internal bullshit detectors. And yeah, that's the game.
All right. And I'm just supposed to talk.
You're supposed to tell a story. Hey,
You like
volunteered.
wanted to do this.
I know. I just was like, I thought that this was like more back and forth, but you know what? Let's go.
We'll interrupt you and do
Okay,
some
that's what
back and forth.
so that's what I was really asking, Ben. Is like,
You have a
is this
story
gonna
to
be
tell,
normal?
right?
Like, yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
Now I'm just
I'll come up with
switching.
one as we go.
I'm just switching my vote to no. Because
I'm not gonna
if you
lie.
haven't prepped for this, unless you're a
Honey,
great
I've never
con artist,
prepped for anything in my life.
there we go. Okay.
In my whole life. So I do know what story I'm going to tell. I'm being a little facetious, right? I did think about this because there is a certain former leader of an Eastern European country.
Oh my God, is it Václav Havel?
No, who was also or at least been a guest on the show. And so originally, we practiced our stories together. So I just have to pull it out of that compartment in my brain. But I will say that, yeah, I've never prepped for anything in my life. And
Is that true?
Yes. And that has not stopped me, for better or for worse. So the one hint that I will give is that, I don't know, has Quinta ever been on In Lieu of Fun?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Quinta likes to pretend or joke that my nickname is Forrest Gump, because oftentimes I just end up being places that nobody intended on me being. We're not really sure what to do about it. And maybe if I prepped better in my life, that wouldn't happen. So the story I'm going to tell is about what happens when you are accidentally held semi-captive by a foreign power that you didn't realize was holding you captive. Are we ready?
We are.
Okay.
That was a good setup.
Right?
Because it's like got
Thank
dramatic
you.
tension and there's like
Don't ruin it. Don't
Don't ruin it. No. And the other hint I will give you is that some of this is true, but that doesn't make all of it inherently true. Okay? Because this is how I'm playing this game.
Okay,
Yeah.
so but you have to identify the parts that are definitely true.
Okay. So
Okay.
the parts that are definitely true are the parts that if the audience was lying, they could Google. Right?
You know, if they cheated.
If they cheated. Yeah. If
Okay,
they
so when you
cheated.
get to parts that you dispense that rule and you're allowing them to Google, just say so.
Yes, like if I was like, I met Michael Jordan, and like Michael Jordan, right? And Michael Jordan like exists, right? Like that's like a
Right,
Googleable
like you know
fact.
that, right.
But like no one could tell I never have met Michael Jordan. But
right, there's no right. So
Is Kate lying?
right, so like what the story that I'm going to tell is about work I did on US-Cuba relations, and that premise is true. You could Google that. And
so that you did work on US-Cuba relations.
Cuba relations, yes.
Okay.
And that I did go to Havana, Cuba. And all of those things are true. But the story of how I ended up doing that and what happened or what didn't happen while we
may
were
or
there
may not be true.
may or may not be true.
All right, we got it.
Are we ready?
It.
All right, because
We
like we got to do it Maggie style, right? Like it's always a little bit special. All right, so a few years ago, I can't remember exactly what year, but it wasn't that long ago because I'm just not that old. I was sitting at work and everybody else in the office was gone because it's Washington, D.C., and they were at a fundraiser that is, of course, a golf game, right? It's a golf fundraiser, right? So they're gone all day. And plus, I'm also the only woman who works there. And anyone who's seen my nails knows that I would never go golfing. So everybody else is out golfing. And I'm sitting in the office and the phone rings. And this lovely gentleman, who's also the landlord for the organization, calls and says, hello, my name is Scott. And I'm on an airplane coming back from Cuba, and I need to use the conference room. And also, can you please make a press conference? And I said, who are you? And why do you know that we have a conference room, right? Because it's a man calling on the phone, and like they could be a crazy person from the internet. You have no idea. So fast forward a couple of hours.
Like us.
Turns out, right, it could be, right? Well, who knows? Who knows? So you fast forward a couple hours. And he was a real person. So this part is also true. And his name is Scott Gilbert. And he was the lawyer for Alan Gross, who was this very nice man who had been in jail in Havana, Cuba for like 8 years. Is that right? About 8 years. And he had negotiated his release. And the press conference that he asked me to impromptu set up was to announce that the US and Cuba were going to restart some sort of interaction with each other that didn't involve, shooting at each other. And I was not prepared or qualified for this moment, but alas, there we are. And this is
so just to be clear, how old were you? Were like administrative support at a nonprofit, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Like, okay, what was I, 23 maybe? Yeah.
And this was, what was the organization that you were working for?
American Security Project. Yes. And so in that moment, I became an expert on US-Cuba relations. One, because I did know a little bit about it, but also because no one in Washington generally cares about Cuba. And so if you make a press conference about something, you're inherently the expert, right? So fast forward, and we start planning this trip to Havana to meet with the Ministry of Interior to talk about U.S. security cooperation, because it turns out we actually do some stuff with Cuba on drug interdiction. And the group was me and a bunch of retired 3- and 4-star generals. So I was the only woman, and there was also an age difference of 45 years. And none of this was not shared with the Cuban government, right? Like, it was not a surprise. We didn't not tell them, but generally speaking, when you're emailing with a foreign entity, you don't say, hello, my name is Maggie, I'm 24 now, my hair is purple, and I'm the only girl on this trip that we're doing. How do you feel about that, right? Like, Kate, is that something you've done?
Yes, I disclose my breasts whenever I do an event. Like, I'm just like, hi, I don't know if you know this, but I have lady parts.
OMG. Right.
No,
exactly.
Yes.
So, I didn't try to hide it, but again, it's just not a thing you start with. And the planning process took a couple months because, at the time, much like now, there wasn't a whole lot of travel between the two countries. And so first, we're on our way there, and you have to fly to Miami, right? And then you can fly to Havana. And I mentioned, we were flying with a bunch of retired 3- and 4 stars. And there was a little incident on the plane from Miami to Havana. And I don't know how many in the audience are familiar with pilots, just as people. I don't know if that's a population that we come into contact with. And
I'm familiar with pilots. Like I know that they exist.
Yes,
but mostly they're a disembodied voice. But yes.
Yeah. And I would say that I'm someone who knows a lot about pilots, like more than maybe I want to on some days. But this situation was prior to a lot of that knowledge. This was the beginning of getting that knowledge. So you fly from Miami to Havana, and you don't take a commercial airplane for that. So we're on a King Air, and we're actually split into two. The groups are in two, one half on each plane. Each person was not cut in half, to be clear. And one of the retired military officers is a pilot. I wouldn't say was a pilot, because as they will tell you, it's something that, never really leaves you. And he approached the cockpit and asked to land the aircraft, which is, I would say, frowned upon, right? Like, it's a general no. And I would say also when you're like landing in
this
Havana,
was a charter flight?
Yes.
So it was like one of the passengers was just like, hey, can I land the plane in Cuba?
100%. 100%. And they were going to let him do it. And so he's sitting there. He was going to co-pilot, because apparently the regulations around who's pilot versus co-pilot on charter aircraft of a certain size, whatever. So he's living his best life, and great. And we get ready.
Wait, and they let him?
They did. They did let him. They let him originally.
I have a feeling Maggie's lying vote is about to skyrocket in the poll.
Wait. So he's sitting in the co-pilot seat, and they begin the approach, and all you hear is them screaming, "Abort!" And I'm like, oh,
no,
this is not how I want to die.
What? Fuck.
Right? Like,
no.
Turns out we had to circle because there were goats on the runway, which is apparently a very common problem.
What year was this again? You're 28, or you're 20, you're 29 now. Yeah. This was 5 years ago?
6 years. So this is like right after Donald Trump was elected.
Yeah. So someone said like pre 9/11 was wild, as if this was like ancient times. This is like
Maggie was like 5.
Yeah, I know.
So I was not working at that time. And I know that the idea of me not working sends the internet into a tizzy. But at some point I was a child, actually. So no, it was not
last week.
I know.
I will say this, goats on the runway sounds plausible to me.
Sounds plausible, right? And the number of times that we have to circle while they get the goats off the runway makes it so that the retired officer is no longer interested in landing the plane. He's lost interest, and he's like, whatever, I'm going to just go sit back in my seat. So he doesn't end up landing the plane. And then we do land, and I get off last, and they're like, excuse me, who are you? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, who am I? There's one woman that you've been talking to for like a year. All of these are old white men. Did you think one of them was the woman? And let's remember that this is a dictatorial regime that's like not, unable to do research on people, right? So like you would think that they knew what they were getting, right? Is that a fair assumption?
No, because my interactions with humans have led me to be disappointed consistently over the years. And almost always do I overestimate individuals' abilities and so like later, ability to...
Like, in 6 months, 6 to 8 months from now, we have to do this again because I have another story that it'll be even more fun.
Wait, you got to finish this story.
But anyway,
because we're having trouble following.
You're like really.
This goes from a phone call where somebody else is on a plane,
because
to you being on the plane and goats being on the runway and so one of the passengers landing the plane, and now somebody's arresting you.
So they do not formally arrest me. Right.
It was an informal
story, but we're not there. It's not there yet. And they're like, who are you? They think I'm a stowaway. Then they think I'm someone's mistress. And everyone is like, oh, wow, neither of those things are true.
Yeah, I mean, who would have, no offense, you like would be
Nothing
the worst
about
mistress
it.
ever. Like, you are very not subtle. Like, there would be like, who's
Like,
that
if
girl
you
with
were-
purple hair
right.
walking in and out of the back door of so-and-so's like
Right.
house?
Like,
I
if
know,
you're
yeah.
looking for low maintenance, this ain't it, team. No.
Okay.
So,
Fair.
right. So eventually I'm like, no, I have a passport. And also we've been emailing for the last year and a half. It'll be fine. So all is well. We go to our hotel. We do the first couple of things. Then, we visit.
And was this in Havana or?
Yeah. So we landed in Havana. Yeah.
Okay. With goats on the runway.
Yeah. Goats on the runway in Havana. And one day we went to a port and our trip was slightly delayed because a cow wandered into the highway and was hit by a car, much like a deer is hit by a car in the Northeast. But because it's Cuba, it's property of the government. And so they have to come out and send like an inspector to verify the death of the cow and how did it happen and who is responsible for the death of the cow. Is it the farmer because the fence wasn't high enough, whatever the hell else it is.
That's not just Cuba, honey. That's like anytime you hit a cow, actually.
Moo.
But anyways, depends on the state you're in, I guess.
Depends on the state. Okay, fair. But it was a whole thing. I mean, we were held there for like a long time, right? Like 6-7 hours, and we didn't even see anything. But we, wrong place, wrong time. Or maybe right place, right time. Really up to you there. So then we come back, and the next day we have a meeting with the Ministry of Interior. And it's totally like you see in those movies, right? It's everybody at the end of one, they're on one side of the table and we're on the other side. And they brought their dogs to the meeting. And what's really interesting is that all of these, well-to-do Cubans, guess what kind of dogs they had?
German Shepherds.
Close. Huskies.
What the fuck? In Cuba?
It's gonna be
when you
hot for
start,
the Huskies.
it makes a lot of sense, but also not good for the dogs, right?
Why does it make a lot of sense?
I like the
I'm
animal
actually
to
having
human
trouble making
ratio
sense of it.
component
Soviet
of this
Union.
story.
I mean, I love a good animal story. So the Soviet Union had I would say, a medium to significant presence on the island for many years. And so like a lot of the senior leaders in the military are named like Igor Chavez, and they have a husky, and you're like, interesting.
All right.
So
and they drive a 1953 like Ford. Like, yeah,
and,
exactly.
And they have air conditioning, and they teach you to make mojitos, and it's great. And everything's going really well, right? So they do teach us how to make mojitos, and it turns out I'm really, really good at it. And in fact, I am recognized in Washington, D.C. by the Cuban embassy as the best mojito maker in the city. I won a contest. That's a different story, but it's sort of related to this one, just to make this even more complicated for Ben. So we do that, and then we have a couple more meetings the next 2 days, and then it's our last day. And they're like, listen, we have this new museum. It's not finished yet. And we really want you guys to see it because we really feel like we've connected with you on this deep level. And we know that you're going to go back to Washington and like really talk about how important US-Cuba drug interdiction cooperation is. And like this is going to be really great. And so we want to show you this thing that is going to be a really important part of our national story. And mind you, mostly what we've learned about the national story, the earlier part of this week, is like they took us to see Dear Leader's foot, which is in a museum. I mean, you have no way of knowing whether or not it's actually his foot, but they say.
Where's the lie? We should get the foot on the show.
Wait, whose foot?
So, this is a whole other story, Ben.
But wait a minute. Wait.
Yeah, you did this, Ben. You asked this question.
And I'm trying.
No,
so
they have.
We're at 5:30, people.
Yeah. Hold this thought, because Dear Leader is a different country.
Yeah, I know. I was making a joke. But
all right.
Part of the founding narrative of, the founding story of Cuba, the origin story, the way that they keep the population connected to it, is that they say that different parts of his body are at different shrines across the island. Each district has a piece of him.
I just want to point out that I don't think he was dead yet.
No, this is not Fidel Castro, guys.
Who
Who
is
are we
it?
talking about?
Who is the revolutionary Che Guevara?
Oh, you mean Che?
Yeah, like dear leader Che Guevara.
Weird.
Yes. So like, right? No,
Okay.
it's weird. It's really weird. Okay, so we were expecting like we would see a rib, you know, or like some hair, something like that. You are all on an acid trip together, and you should see what it's like to live with me. It's awful. So we're like, all right, fine. We will go to this museum, but you have to make sure that we are back at the airport by 2 p.m. because exit visas from Cuba are really hard to get, and it's this whole thing, and you know, you risk having the plane shut down or whatever. I don't know. It's complicated. So we go to the museum, and you walk in, and the floor of the museum is plexiglass, and underneath the plexiglass are shell casings that they maintain are from CIA provided weapons. And as a devout, observant Jew, the only way I can describe what I saw was like the Cubans' version of the Holocaust Museum about US attempts to eliminate Cuban sovereignty. Yeah, get there, Kate. I'm going to give you a minute to, yeah? Okay. So we're like, all right, cool. And let's keep in mind.
Can we go to the airport now?
Yeah. And I was like, so I'm ready to go, right? Because let's keep in mind, it's me and it's a group of senior retired military leaders. And I'm like, oh God, they're going to take a picture of them in here.
Who are like going nuts and like want to try to like land everybody's plane for them. It sounds like a metaphor. Like, let me land your plane. Sounds like some type of weird come on or something.
Yeah, like you're like, huh. But to know him is to know that he literally just was interested in the plane because he's a pilot. But so I was in this moment very worried that they were going to take pictures of us. Also, it's not Simchat Torah. It is Sukkot. We are on day 2 of Sukkot. But thank you for knowing that it was a day. I appreciate that. And I was really worried they're going to take pictures of us and, you know, use it as fuel for like, see, there's validity in this story. And I was like, what story? Well, let me tell you, friends, this was a museum to memorialize all of the people who had been murdered by the US government in Cuba's fight for independence. And
Cool. Great. Yeah, you're totally not going to be like the purple-haired American lady from like Southern California who showed up to like,
I was just here for fun, right? And Ben looks like he has a question or is concerned.
No. I'm still trying to pick up the thread of the story here.
Me too.
Because you haven't been held captive yet.
Well, I was almost held captive once. But
there you go, Ben.
So we're going, and you know, the first floor is about like basic history, the founding of Cuba. Then you go up the stairs, which is a water feature. And basically imagine a cliff-like waterfall, right? But instead of rocks making the cliff, it's shell casings from CIA-provided bullets, right? And there's water running down them. And it's very loud and it's fully immersive. It's a tube, basically, of a staircase that you're walking up. And you're like, this is totally fine. And the second floor is about American children that were kidnapped by the Cuban children that were kidnapped by the Catholic Church and rehomed in the United States, totally plausible. And then the second half of the second floor is about various attempts at assassination by the US government against Fidel Castro, right? So we've got sharks, right? We have cats. But my personal favorite is that yellow fever is a CIA-made disease, and that the CIA mosquitoes to fly from the swamps of Washington, D.C., all the way to Havana, Cuba, and across the island and infect everyone and kill them all. And that really got me, right? So, and again, remembering that the group that is with me. And they're starting to have a bit of a panic attack, which is fair, right? Like, so we're like, hey, can we go to the airport? And they're like, yeah. We're going to take you out this door. We're going to go out, down this other staircase, go into the back entrance and go out into the parking lot, and we'll just go. So that way you don't have to go out onto the main street, because people have heard that you're here and there's a crowd outside because they, the press wants to talk to you. And you're like, that seems not good. And we're walking. And the shell casings are on the floor, right? And then they're on the walls. The plexiglass goes up the walls. And then as you're walking, it goes up and it covers the ceiling. And you're basically in what I can describe as a panic room, except instead of like, what material is used in panic rooms to make it so you don't panic?
Oh dear. That is absolutely not the point of panic rooms. There's nothing in a panic room to make you not panic.
Nick.
Okay.
It's where you go in. I grew up with a panic room in my house. That's a whole other story. But that's why I am the way I am, Kate. But it's like, imagine that, right? And it turns out, friends, there is no back staircase. And there is no way to get downstairs. And there is no parking lot. And instead, they close the door and they say, we're not going to keep you forever, but we're going to keep you for a while. And we're not going to sign your exit visas until you sit in here and really think about what you've done. And then they shut the door and walk away for like 3 hours, maybe 4 hours.
What do you mean? What have you done? Allegedly.
Well, it turns out we're Americans, Kate. And we're in the and everyone else is old. So we sit in there for a really long time. It feels like a really long time. And people start getting hungry. And I don't know how much you guys know about like white men over 72 when they get hungry. It's really interesting. And so a lot of screaming happens. It gets really chaotic. And finally, they open the door to say, does anyone want, anything to eat? And our pilot friend says, I shouldn't have landed this fucking plane in Cuba. And then someone else says, you didn't land the plane in Cuba. Someone else, the pilot landed. Like a fight breaks out, mostly because they're hangry, right? And out of sheer terror over old fighting men, the Cuban government releases us and pretends nothing happens and puts us on the plane. And when we all get home, there's really nice rum and really nice cigars waiting for all of us on our various front stoops. Ben, why are you muted? Why can't I hear you?
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Now I can.
So Ducks with Pants says this is not a lie, it's a fever dream.
That's most of my life.
So we are going to go to questions. If you want to interrogate Maggie about this fever dream, flag it in the Ask a Question box, and I will bring 2 or 3 of you on to ask your questions. Kate, you get the first question.
Have you stayed in touch with any of these people that you were in this experience with?
Yeah. How could you not? I know them quite well.
KK,
What?
and Maggie, I just addressed
We're all the same
wrong
to you?
one of No, I was looking at you, and I want to go back to the physical relics of Che Guevara's body in different parts of Cuba. Something I have not previously heard of, which, not being an expert in Cuban politics or history, doesn't tell you very much. But my memory was that Che Guevara was killed nowhere near Cuba, but either in
Thank
don't
you.
know, Ecuador or
It was like
Bolivia or something.
it was like Central America or South
It was
America.
South America.
Mhm.
How did his foot get to do you know anything about how like his knuckle ended up in one province of Cuba, and like how did this happen?
So I'm going to give you my answer, which is just because the Cuban government tells you it's his foot doesn't mean it's his foot. That means
All right.
like, because I asked the same thing. And I'm so glad you all hung on for this, because the things in my life that I was allowed to pull from were severely limited. So I went with this.
Christopher,
Okay.
do you have a question?
Yes. Let's see. Where should I begin?
I swear I'm much more linear in person.
No, you're not.
No.
Absolutely not. I mean,
no,
I
I'm just like this all
I
the
am not
time.
one. I am not one to say.
No,
But
it's
yes,
chaos all
go
the
ahead.
time, friends. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
It was a pretty great story.
Thank you.
Let's say first question would be, what did the Cubans understand was the purpose of the general's visit, and was everyone sort of on the same page, at least that your American delegation was here for a specific purpose?
Yeah, so we had carefully planned it, and carefully chosen who was going to go on this trip, and it was specifically about understanding how the U.S. and Cuba could work together on national and homeland security issues, with the explicit purpose of allowing the experts on the trip to come to their own conclusions, and based on those conclusions, share that information with Congress.
Okay. And the person that first called you to alert you to this possible break in relations, was this person included in the trip, or did you find out who this person was and work with them after the phone call?
Yes. So the reason he reached out to the organization and had the phone number at all was because, in addition to being a lawyer, he owned the floor of the building that our office was on. And so he was our landlord, and we just happened to have the larger conference room. So his name is Scott Gilbert, and he is alive and well and wonderful and living in Washington, D.C.
Okay. So my final question. Oh, Ben, you want to say something?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. My final question would be, how much into the on the ground experience were you before they told you that you were going to be detained, and you wouldn't get, so you wouldn't get your exit visas until you apologized for American actions in Cuba?
Sorry, how far into?
So how long were you on the ground, sort of in this whole
the whole trip, like number of days
before it took this dramatic turn of you sort of being detained?
That's a good question. So it was the last day of the trip, right? Because we were going to the airport right before, and the trip was, March something to March something, maybe like March 11th to March 16th, 2016. So what is time?
So it was the last day of the trip.
Yeah, it was the last day of the trip. I can't remember how many days it was exactly.
All right. Daniel, you have 3 questions.
What was the gender composition of the group that you had these experiences with, roughly?
So it was all men and me. The only other woman that we interacted with on the trip was the interpreter from the Cuban side.
And if you had to tell the story backwards in a few bullet points, could you do so?
Have you listened to anything about me ever? I can't do anything backwards in a few bullet points. I could try.
Go for it.
Oh God, you want me to try that? I don't know that we have that time.
Well, it's just bullet points. It's
okay,
not.
So
have you guys not been listening? Do not think in bullet points. Like this is not like it is like shooting and fireworks.
So you want my bottom line up front is in Cuba we don't have fuck around and find out. In Cuba we have find out regardless of whether or not you fuck around.
I'm not sure that's quite an answer, but Daniel, your third question.
I don't have any more questions. I feel completely bamboozled.
All right.
I didn't know I had this impact on people.
Do you have more questions? Wait, Daniel, you can't go away. We're going to need your verdict. I'm bringing you back.
I guess that my second question is what happened after you got back?
We landed
at your work.
Oh, you mean like not immediately at the airport? You know, it's funny. I actually don't think we've ever talked about it.
Yeah.
Which is funny because you'd think you'd talk about something like that. I mean, one time I've talked it. Let me take that back. Somewhat recently, I did talk about it with one of the retired 3-stars who was on the trip with me and his wife when we were at Costco during COVID, because we went to Costco together.
Kate, your last question.
What'd you buy at Costco?
Mostly, I mean, imagine how I am at Costco, Kate. I need adults.
Yeah, I actually sounds horrifying.
And my job is to hold the Post-it notes for. So the senior officer I'm talking about, he is one of our former neighbors, and so we were doing Costco trips with and for him and his wife during COVID. And so my job is to hold the Post-it notes, so I can probably recite from memory what they got at Costco.
No, that's okay. Go ahead, Ben.
All right, I have 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Maggie, were you scared?
No. You know what? Actually, the thing I was most scared of is that guy, Scott Gilbert, who we could blame all of this on if we want to, had told me explicitly that under no circumstances should I let the Cubans move us off our schedule, because if they do that, all hell breaks loose. And I was terrified that I was going to be in trouble.
Good employee.
Yeah.
One other question.
That doesn't sound right. I'm just kidding, Meg.
So you and I have known each other
A long time
almost
now.
since the time this happened.
Yes.
Why have you never told me this story?
Have I never told you this story?
No.
Well, I think probably because it may have been overshadowed by like the adventure to Estonia and all the opera singing. And then like that time I got sat on by the president of a defense corporation at the Munich Security Conference because they thought I was an intern. And just like all the other Forrest Gump
it's not
things.
okay to it's not okay to sit on interns. Like,
No, it's not okay to sit on interns. And then let's face it, I thought long and hard about, should I do the story of when Mike Flynn pitched building nuclear power plants with the Russians in Egypt. I thought about, should I tell the story of that meeting? And then I wasn't sure the legal ramifications of that story.
Yeah, that's okay.
All right. So I think we're ready. So
I hope
I
still
want to
have
say
friends
the
after
audience is split. 51% to 49% believes you're
Really?
lying. It's a very close vote. Usually the audience is not split on this.
this. Really?
Christopher, what do you think? Is this story true?
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's mostly true. There are elements in there, embellishments, like I think the Che Guevara dear leader thing is not true. So it has like the sort of general ring of truth with some false.
We get it. Yeah, like
With a little
mostly.
flavor.
In
Yes,
there. Yeah.
like an
Mhm.
embellishment. Okay,
Artistic
Daniel.
licenses, yeah.
Daniel?
I'm kind of split like the poll. I guess I'll say it's true. I have no clue. The only thing I found odd was the phrase "men over the age of 72." I've never heard that phrase before with such detail. But
Maggie.
Yeah, I was like, that's the most truthful part of the whole thing, maybe.
Yeah, I think that there's nothing weird about that.
Okay, KK,
What?
what's your verdict?
I say it's true, mostly because I don't think that I believe Maggie when she says she hasn't prepared for anything, and so
And so you think she wouldn't have?
Yeah.
She couldn't
wouldn't
just
have known
make
how
this
to
shit
run.
up on the spot.
And I also have a bunch of crazy stories like that I've been like kind of toying with, and I'm like, I should tell these stories, but like, I don't know. Go ahead, Ben. What do you think?
All right, like Daniel, I am torn on this one.
Oh, I thought you said confused about 72-year-old men.
And I want to talk through my confusion.
Okay.
All right. On the one hand, I know Maggie did work for ASP, in which capacity she worked with a bunch of 3-stars and did things like doing fact-finding trips and organizing stuff. And so the basic story that she could have been sitting at her desk and some guy says, hey, let's organize a trip for the ASP generals to Cuba. That's completely plausible, and I have no reason to doubt that. I am hung up in a way that nobody else seems to be on a passenger simply declaring that he wants to land the plane in a charter. That does not seem very realistic to me. On the other hand...
Yeah, it seems so crazy that you couldn't make it up. Like, it would just be too obvious.
Yeah. Hold that thought. It's,
Okay.
I'm also thinking if there were a myth of Che Guevara body parts all over Cuba, one in each province in Cuba, I would think that was something that I would have heard at some point because it's super weird. So I've got these two blocks that I'm like, this sounds more like, Maggie shooting the shit than it does like something that really happened. But then the core of what happens in the story, which is, you go to, there are some meetings where, okay, people bring their dogs. Maybe. That doesn't bother me terribly.
I'm super into it. I brought my dog to a conference last week, and no one thought it was weird.
So I don't have a big problem with the meetings, and then they take you to a propagandistic museum. Actually sounds about right. And that the museum is one of U.S. barbarities against the Cuban people. That sounds right. So the only part of that part of the story and then they hold you there for a few hours to menace you and to emphasize that they could. But then there's rum. Like that all sounds right. So I'm kind of with Chris that there is like the basic story makes a lot of sense. I have reservations about the guy landing the plane and the Che foot thing. And And so I'm going to go with it's probably true because I think it is more likely that something like those things happened, or at least the Cubans said they happened, than that Maggie just made that up on the spot. So I'm going to also go with basically true, maybe with slight embellishments.
Interesting.
Maggie, it's time for the big reveal.
Every single part of it was true. And I actually now have the pictures for you, if you'd like.
Do you have
to
a picture of Shay's foot?
I have a picture of where they say Shay's foot is. And for the record,
is it skeletal or is it like, was it like?
You can't see it, but here's the floor I was talking about.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Shell casings.
Shell casings, right? And you're like, oh, and here's the water feature with the crosses and the shell casings that I was talking about, the tubular staircase. Shay's foot is
wow.
Let's see, which one is the best picture? I took a couple because it was weird, right, guys? And
no, totally normal.
Totally
disembodied
normal.
feet.
Disembodied feet. Here's the house that it's in, actually. Sorry, I have a phone call coming in that we don't need to. Here's the building it's in.
It says Che. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think for me, the picture that says it all is this one. Those are missiles.
What are the missiles?
Cuban Missile Crisis missiles. Oh,
where?
The camouflage is really working, guys. This.
Oh, that's
that long thing is a missile? Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. And
wow.
Yeah. And there's the
Jesus.
Yeah, no, all of this is insane. And all of it is true.
All right. Maggie, you have
amazing story.
Half of the audience.
Well done.
You did not fool.
I didn't fool those that know me. How's that?
You didn't fool KK or me or Christopher or well, Daniel just was bamboozled and went with he wasn't sure. But this is a fabulous story. You're a great American.
Thank you.
That was really good.
Thank you. I'm glad that you guys held on, and this has been a wonderful, very, for me, relaxing hour. And thank you all for your service.
And we are going to be back 22 hours and 23 hours and 1 minute from now. Kate, do we know who our guest is tomorrow?
No, I'm working on it. I've sent out tons of emails in the last couple of days, but just people are very busy. So.
Well, we're gonna have a sequence of party leaders from Canadian parties on to discuss the details of coalition negotiations, of which there are none. Until then, Kate,
we don't have fun anymore, but we do have our feet.
There we go. And some for most of us, they're still connected to our ankles.
Yeah, clip that and send it to Tom Nichols.
I'll tweet an